digestive system. I think we know a lot about digestive system. I know heart is always my favorite organ, but I like to eat so much, I like talking about the digestive system. And I think I do it pretty well. Eat that is. And speaking of, we're going to start our digestive talk with ingestion. And it's usually at this point that I go the introduction of solid and liquid chocolate into the oral cavity. Yeah, chocolate milk, Reese's peanut butter cups. Favorite chocolate? What's favorite chocolate? Reese's? Huh? What'd you say? Favorite chocolate? Oh, yeah. I have to stop for Snickers every time. Kit Kats. Yeah. To me, if it's chocolate, I like it. All right? And Easter's coming up. Now, I do have to confess, Easter time, okay, will you admit it with me? I'm addicted to robin eggs. Those malted milk robin eggs? Are you kidding me? Reese's eggs are okay, but the robin eggs, what is wrong with you people?
I think that's just you.
Cadbury, okay, Cadbury chocolate, that's good, but man, those robin eggs, whew, my wife and I eat them like popcorn. Sitting. It's funny, we don't have any kids, but we buy a lot of Halloween candy, and we buy a lot of Easter candy, and we eat them all ourselves. Yeah. All right, so digestive system, we eat stuff, right? That's going to be the beginning of our digestive process. Motility, we got to move it around. What's one of the first muscles that is going to start functioning to move your food through your body and process and start digestion? That tongue. Your tongue. And if you don't know that your tongue functions as part of the digestive process, how many times have you bitten your tongue while you're eating? Too many times. That's how you know your tongue. It's intraoral transport. It's moving your food around so that your teeth can mechanically process the food. So your tongue is really important in mixing and moving materials. Secretions. What's some of our first secretions? Saliva. Saliva. We got a lot more secretions to put into this to process the materials. Secretions in the stomach, secretions in the intestines, secretions coming from the liver and the gallbladder. The pancreas is going to be dumping stuff in. A lot of chemicals are going to be placed into with our food. Digestion, as sort of a broad term, is going to be breaking down the Big Mac into small enough particles that we can absorb them into the bloodstream. That's what we're going to be talking about. Mechanically, we're breaking the food down into smaller and smaller pieces, which increases the surface area with which enzymes can attack. That's all part of the digestive process. So we talked about mechanical, chemical, that's all the enzymes, bile salts that we're going to put in that helps to emulsify fats, and we'll explain the emulsification process and what that actually means.
Hormones too?
We're not really putting hormones into our food. What we're doing is hormones are going to control the secretion of some of these chemicals. Okay. Yeah. I can't think of a hormone we're dumping into the actual process of breaking it down.
I was thinking like Motilin to like...
That's going to cause your muscles to move, but the hormone itself is not mixing with the food.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then finally, the whole point of this process is to take the good stuff, take the glucose, take the protein, take the lipids, and absorb it into our body so we can use it to build the materials we need to sustain us. So we got to get it in, we got to break it down, and we got to absorb it. And then we've got the leftovers, right? The stuff we don't want, we've got to eliminate. And so this is one of the reasons this chapter is so long, because that's a lot to do. I like just focusing on the eating part, but all the rest just comes with the territory. as a developmental biologist, looking at embryonic development, I think we've already talked before about one of your earliest baby pictures was a 3-layer pancake. Did we talk about this? The bottom pancake was called endoderm. The top pancake was ectoderm. And what did we call the middle? Mesoderm. So y'all are getting some medical terminology here. And that 3 pancake rolled up into like a jelly roll. And when that rolled up, you have this outside tube of ectoderm. You got all the middle stuff, the mesoderm, and you have this inside tube of endoderm. And so a lot of times people say humans are just a tube within a tube. Our outside tube is our skin, and our inside tube is our GI tract, alimentary canal. You can use a couple of different terms for that, because this tube's got a hole here, and it's got a hole at the other end. And it's a tube that is dilated in places, bends in places, but it's still essentially a tube. So this tube that is our alimentary canal, digestive tract, has a generalized 4-layer structure. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Mostly anatomy, but we're going to get into a little bit of histology as well. And so this inside tube that we're talking about has these 4 layers, and these layers are from the inside, adjacent to the lumen, and moving out. So our innermost layer that's in contact with our food is called the mucosa. Guess what's just under the mucosa? Submucosa. Isn't that cool? I know, right? I love it when the words make sense. Then we have the next layer. Can you guess what principal tissue comprises this layer? Muscle. And we're in the digestive tract, so what type of muscle? Smooth muscle. Exactly, it's smooth muscle because it's involuntary. So we have the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis, which is going to be the business end of moving this material through the system. And then finally, on the outside, we have our connective tissue, which is either an adventitia, if it's connected to the body, or if it's surrounded by a mesentery. You know, we talked about our pleura, visceral, parietal, pleura. If it's surrounded by a mesentery like that, we call it a serosa. But this is the outermost layer.
Wait, what's a mesentery again? Sorry.
So it's a thin, simple squamous layer of mesentery. It's just a covering that's going to be over our visceral organs.
Okay.
And so if we have a visceral mesentery over a portion of our, see, that's what they're showing right there, that membrane, that's a mesentery.
Okay.
And so in this case, if that mesentery wraps completely around,
Then it's a serosa.
then it's going to be a serosa. If you don't have the mesentery, if it's just connective tissue, if it's adjacent to the body wall, then we call it an adventitia.
Yes, sir.
But it's the outermost layer that can have either one of those names, depending on what material is present. All right? So, of course, we're going to start with the mucosa. So, on the inside, adjacent to the lumen, our mucosa is going to be simple columnar epithelium. And while in some regions of our alimentary canal, I'm thinking stomach primarily, we're going to be involved in plenty of secretion. Principally, what I want you to think about in our digestive tract. Simple columnar epithelium. Simple columnar, and we're going to have these microvilli on the surface. And why do we have microvilli? What are we trying to increase?
Surface area.
Surface area. We're increasing the surface area because of absorption. Everything you put in your mouth, your body intends to absorb and use. That is not a recent evolutionary thing. This goes way back to when humans were hunters and gatherers, and they didn't know when they were going to get their next meal. So they would kill something, a prey item, and they would eat the whole thing. You see anybody own snakes? First of all, if you own a snake, I don't know what's wrong with you. Oh, of course you own a snake. Oh, you don't? You're just messing with me? Because snakes will eat, and it'll take a while to digest it, but they won't eat but every couple of weeks. So when you do eat, you have to store it. And early humans did that, and we have that capacity. This whole 3 meal a day, that's a sociology thing. It's not a biology thing. Now, I don't eat 3 meals a day. I'd eat 6 if I could. So I kind of snack and stuff all the time. Would y'all mind shutting those doors? I don't know what they're doing out there. One of y'all get that, please? Yeah, because we're not done. So that's the reason why we have this particular epithelium. And it's going to change depending on if we're secreting mostly or if we're absorbing mostly. This is going to be stomach, and this is principally going to be our intestine. Now, as we look at this mucosal layer, you can see that, of course, we've got our epithelium, simple columnar. But then underneath the epithelium, underneath the basement membrane, and before we get to our submucosa, which is going to be these red and blue dots, we're going to have this space that we call a lamina propria. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But as we go through our alimentary canal, we're going to see that in the beginning of the tube and at the end of the tube, we're going to have stratified squamous epithelium. Now, non-keratinized or parakeratinized, that's like the lining of your oral cavity. And when you get to the end of the alimentary canal, when you get to the rectum, that's once again going to be stratified squamous epithelium. But there's a transition, right? If you feel just inside your lip, it's really smooth. But then when you get to the surface of your lip and then you get down here on your chin, your lip is a transition. It's called the vermilion zone. It's where you're going from keratinized epithelium to non-keratinized inside your lip. The same thing happens on your buttocks. On the outside, you've got your skin, you're keratinized. But as you're moving around and into the rectum, it's going to change into the non-keratinized. And then as we go up into the alimentary canal, then we're going to get more to the columnar.
So why does having the epithelium non-keratinized?
Non-keratinized basically is saying there's not a lot of friction, because when you're passing materials through, it's either lubricated with mucus that you make or water, okay? And here you got a lot of abrasion going on with the lip, air drying out, food that you may eat, nacho chips, you know. I'm always cutting myself on nacho chips.
So you need it to be smooth.
Correct. Yeah.
What are the red and blue dots again?
The red and blue dots is arteries and veins.
Oh, okay.
They're just showing where the arteries and veins are located here. Yeah. So just beneath our epithelium and beneath our basement membrane, we're going to have this region. Lamina refers to layer. Propria, I'm not real sure the derivation of that word, propria. But when we get to our lamina propria, there's our basement membrane. In this area, this is where we're going to have blood vessels, nerves, and we're either going to have some lymphatic capillaries down in here. And go ahead and put this term in, lacteal, L-A-C-T-E-A-L, lacteal. When we get to the intestines, that blind-ended capillary that's within the villi in your intestines, that blind-ended capillary is referred to as a lacteal or a central lacteal, because it's usually in the middle of one of our villi. So go ahead and get accustomed to knowing we're playing with lymphatics, because a lot of the nutrients you absorb from your food goes into the lymphatic system instead of the bloodstream. Particularly fats are going to do that a lot. So in the lamina propria, because of all these vessels, that's where this absorption is going to happen. Lipophilic, what do you think that word means? We know philic means lumping. Lipo, fat. hydrophilic water. So the fatty stuff goes into that lacteal. The hydrophilic goes into the blood vessel. Now, this is not the muscularis layer that's beneath the submucosa. Okay? Everybody hear that? The muscularis mucosa, this is going to be a thin muscular layer. I mean, it is just that dark little line right there, right before you get to this red and blue lamina propria. Do you see that dark line? That dark line is the muscularis mucosa. This is a thin layer of smooth muscle. And this is basically going to shake and bake. So that's just going to keep shaking around these villi that are poking out here. You're not going to get a lot of motility of food moving up and down the alimentary canal from the muscularis mucosa. It's just kind of quivering around, just shaking it a little bit. And it's the muscularis mucosa that really is the defining line between the mucosal layer, and once we get deeper than the muscularis mucosa, then we're in the submucosa. So don't confuse the muscularis mucosa muscle with the layer itself that is called muscularis, period. Okay? Got that?
So is that its own layer, or is it within the mucosa?
The muscularis mucosa is within the mucosa layer. It's just a different type of tissue that they decided to give a name to. And I guess that's why they call it muscularis mucosa, to distinguish it from just the muscularis. So now we've gone from our epithelium, our muscularis, now we're into the submucosa, which is this tissue they got all colored here. You see the dark red, that's our muscularis. But the submucosa is just on the luminal side of our muscularis layer. Connective tissue, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, but we are going to have some nerves and ganglia. What are ganglia? Ganglia, bundles of something in the peripheral nervous system. Nerve cell bodies. Ganglia are our neuronal cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. And we're going to have these nerve cell bodies, these ganglia and nerves that are going to smooth muscles and glands that we have in our alimentary canal. And this is going to be called the submucosal nerve plexus. This is going to be one of two control centers for peristalsis, these spasmodic, rhythmic, smooth muscle contractions that either mix the food or propel food down the alimentary canal. Now, it's also in our submucosa that we have one of our friends that we learned about in last unit, lymphatic tissue. This is where we have our mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, or MALT. And so those lymphocytes are going to be located in that submucosa tissue. And some of those are going to be pretty impressive. Do you remember Peyer's patches? Okay, we're going to see those again as we get into the deeper parts of our intestines. Muscularis, this is the engine of our alimentary canal. And we're going to have a couple of different layers. And the layers of our smooth muscle are going to be distinguished from one another by the direction of the smooth muscle cells. And so on the inside, the innermost layer of our smooth muscle is going to be our inner circular layer. So the smooth muscle cells are wrapping around our epithelium, wrapping around our mucosa and submucosa, like your belt goes around your waist. And so when we contract, or when that layer, the inner circular layer, is instructed to contract, what's going to happen to our alimentary canal? it's going to constrict. It's going to constrict. It's never going to close off, but it's going to constrict. Next, we have an outer layer. And in the illustration here, you're seeing sort of these cut, rounded sections. That's because the outer layer of smooth muscle is longitudinal and it's running along the length of the alimentary canal. So it's a ribbon that would run up and down your body. And so when that layer, the outer longitudinal layer, is instructed to contract, what's going to happen to the alimentary canal? It's going to shorten.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's going to shorten. So, let me just introduce you peristalsis a little bit here. How many of you have ever gone to the dryer and you put your sweatpants in the dryer, and when you pull your sweatpants out, the string of the waist is still in the dryer? Or one of the strings gotten sucked up into the waist, you know? How do you restring it, or how do you get it back to the normal length?
You have to like push it through the...
So what you do is you put the string in until you feel the, what is that, aglet? No, it's not the aglet. What is it called on the end? Huh? No, the eyelet's the hole. The aglet, was I right? Yeah, so you feel the end, and so you pinch it, right? Then you scrunch up the material, and then you let the aglet go, and you try to pull it through. And then you keep doing that. You pinch it down here, scrunch it, let it go, pull it through. That is a great example of peristalsis. Because what your alimentary canal is doing, let's say we're moving food to my right, the alimentary canal is going to constrict on the uphill side, and that's our inner circular layer. Then the longitudinal layer is going to shorten. Okay, so we're moving this point closer to this one. Yeah. And so then here we're going to constrict, and we're going to relax in between, and it's going to pull that material down here. Then this can open up. Then we're going to constrict here, and we're just going to keep doing that, like pulling that string in the waist of your sweatpants. The waist of your sweatpants is the alimentary canal. The string is like the food inside. Your fingers are the muscle. So that's how peristalsis is going to work. Sometimes the inner circular, it just does this. Anybody ever made bread? What am I doing? Kneading the food. You're breaking it up. You're mixing it together. Sometimes that's just what your stomach and your intestines are doing, is mixing that material. So that's a little preview of peristalsis based on what we're doing with our muscularis layer of smooth muscle. Now in the submucosa, we had that myenteric plexus. Okay, here, the submucosal nerve plexus. Here we have the myenteric nerve plexus. Again, neurons, cell bodies that are going to control the layers of contraction. Now, sometimes, and in some books, you're going to see this referred to as Auerbach's plexus. Whether you use myenteric or Auerbach's, I don't care. All right? The submucosal gives you a location. The myenteric does kind of, if you associate that with the muscularis. This is the second control center for peristalsis. And again, this is autonomic, right? During which autonomic phase are these going to be most active? You remember we got two components of the autonomic nervous system? What are our two components of the autonomic nervous system? This or that, or this or that? Rest and digest. Which one is rest and digest? The parasympathetic. So this is all active during parasympathetic. What's happening to these nerve plexus during sympathetic response? You remember? They're shut off. You're not digesting anything. We're not even sending blood, by and large, to the GI tract. So it's just out of business. It's done. Now, in some places of the alimentary canal, you're going to have an expanded portion of the muscularis, and it's going to be this really thick, ginormous ring of smooth muscle. Principally, it's going to be the intercircular, because what we're going to do in these regions is we are going to completely close off these regions, and these are called sphincters. One of the first ones we're going to get to is the lower esophageal sphincter that's at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach. Now, a lot of times these sphincters are control the passage of food from one stage to the next. The lower esophageal sphincter, however, is different because it's preventing food and acid from going backwards. And if you know someone that has acid reflux disease, that lower esophageal sphincter has been compromised. All right? And it may be because of a hiatal hernia. But we'll get to that when we get to the anatomy in a bit. Oh, I kind of got ahead of myself. Peristalsis. This is going to be, we can see here, that's going to be our inner circular. You see how it pinches stuff off? And then we can mix this stuff together. This is what I was trying to illustrate on the left with our sweatpants and our string. You pinch it off, then you shorten the region and you slide this down. That's going to be the peristalsis that moves it in that direction. But then you can also knead this up with all these different little constrictions that are happening.